A man sits on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee in the dark before the birds have started, watching another man pray. He has watched this before. Not once. Many times. His friend rises before dawn and walks away from camp alone and stays gone so long that the disciples wake, build a fire, eat, argue about who will catch the most fish, and still he is not back. Sometimes he prays through the entire night. Sometimes the sun is fully up before he returns, and nobody asks him where he went, because by now they already know. You have probably never watched someone pray like that. Most of us have not. Most of us pray the way we check a text message, fast, distracted, half-finished before we even start the next thing. But this man prayed like it was the most important meeting of his day, every day. And one morning, one of his followers finally can't hold the question in anymore. "Lord," he says, "teach us to pray." Not teach us a prayer. Not give us some words to say. Teach us to pray, the way you pray. The kind that makes a man disappear into the hills for hours and come back different. And what Jesus says next becomes the most repeated words in human history, said in over 1,000 languages. Carved into cathedral stone, whispered by soldiers in trenches and mothers at hospital bedsides and children half asleep at bedtime. You have probably said it yourself. Maybe 100 times. Maybe 1,000. Here's the strange part. The part almost nobody notices. The only prayer Jesus ever taught his disciples to say, word for word. He never said the same way twice. Stay with that. Because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why a prayer meant to be repeated was never repeated the same way once. And what that tells you about what Jesus was actually trying to hand his friends that morning on the hillside. This is not a magic formula. This is not a spell with the right combination of syllables. This is not a script you recite to unlock something in the sky, like a vending machine that dispenses blessings if you press the right buttons in the right order. This is something else. Something most people who have said this prayer 10,000 times have never actually been taught, because hidden inside 7 short lines is an entire way of approaching God. Who he is to you, what you owe him, what you're allowed to ask for, and what it costs to mean every word. Jesus didn't teach his disciples a recitation. He taught them an architecture. And once you see the structure underneath the familiar words, you will never pray them the same way again. So let's go back to that hillside. Let's hear, slowly on purpose, what Jesus actually said, and what almost everyone since has missed. Jesus starts with one word, not a title, not a description of power, a relationship. Father, he could have started anywhere else. He could have said Almighty. He could have said Lord of Hosts, or King of Kings, or Eternal Judge. Every one of those titles is true, and every one of those titles appears somewhere else in Scripture. But on that hillside, teaching grown men how to talk to the Creator of the universe, he chose the word a toddler uses to call across a room. In his own language, the word was likely something close to Abba. And here is where you've probably been told something that isn't quite right. You may have heard a preacher say Abba just means daddy, like baby talk, like the first sound an infant makes before it can speak. That's not exactly true. Scholars who have studied the word carefully will tell you Abba wasn't only used by toddlers. Grown sons used it. Grown daughters used it. Their whole lives, for their fathers. It carried warmth. Yes, but it carried weight too. Closeness and respect in the same breath, not daddy the way a baby coos it, closer to dear father, the kind of address that says I am yours and I trust you, in 5 letters. And here's what most people miss about that. Jesus uses this exact word again later, not while teaching, but while suffering. In a garden called Gethsemane, hours before his arrest, with the weight of the cross already pressing on his chest, he prays, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Yet not what I will, but what you will. The same word he taught his disciples to use in comfort, he used himself in agony. That tells you something. This word was never meant for easy mornings only. It was built to hold the worst nights too. Maybe your own father failed you. Maybe he was absent or harsh or never once said he was proud of you. If that's true, the word father might not feel warm to you at all. It might feel like a wound Jesus is asking you to touch on purpose, but here is the truth underneath it. God is not measured by your father. Your father, however good or however broken, was only ever a flawed reflection of what this word was always meant to point toward. You are not praying to your father's failures. You are praying to the one father every human father, at his absolute best, was only ever a shadow of. And then Jesus adds two more words. Hallowed be your name. Hallowed isn't a word you use at the dinner table. Nobody describes their coffee as hallowed. It means set apart, sacred, untouchable in the sense that nothing else gets to stand where it stands. In the Greek text, the word is hagias theto, and the grammar matters here more than you'd think. It's in what's called the passive voice. Jesus isn't teaching his disciples to say, I will treat your name as holy. He's teaching them to ask God to act, to hallow his own name, to make his own holiness visible in a world that keeps trying to shrink him down to something manageable. Because names in Scripture were never just labels. They were identity. When Moses stood in front of a bush that burned without burning up, he asked God a simple question. Who are you exactly? And God didn't give him a title. He gave him a name that was really a claim. I am. Not I was, not I might be, depending on circumstances. I am, unchanging, unshrinkable. That's the name Jesus is teaching his disciples to call holy. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable in a good way. If you say, hallowed be your name on Sunday, and then spend Monday through Saturday living like God's name barely matters, does the prayer mean anything? Pay attention to this, because it's not a small detail. Hallowing God's name was never just a sentence to recite. It was meant to be a description of your whole life. You can see this lived out, generations before Jesus ever spoke these words, in a man named Daniel. Daniel was a Jewish exile in Babylon, a foreign empire, a foreign king, a foreign god on every street corner. And there came a day when a new law was passed. Pray to anyone but the king and you die. Daniel could have hidden. He could have prayed in silence, behind a locked door where no one would ever know. Instead, Scripture tells us, he went to his upstairs room, the one with the windows that faced toward Jerusalem, and knelt down and prayed exactly the way he always had, 3 times a day, out loud, in full view of anyone watching. He didn't hallow God's name with his lips only. He hallowed it with his knees, in a city that worshipped someone else, knowing exactly what it would cost him. That's the difference between reciting a phrase and living a name. So far, we've only made it through 2 lines. Our Father, hallowed be your name. 2 phrases, an entire way of relating to God hidden inside each one. And we're not even halfway through. There's still more. Kingdom, surrender, daily bread, forgiveness, temptation, deliverance. Each one carries the same kind of weight we just unpacked. If this is helping you see this prayer differently than you ever have before, take a second right now and subscribe and turn on notifications, because we walk through Scripture like this, verse by verse, word by word, every single week. Now let's keep going, because the next line Jesus teaches is not a comfortable one. It's a surrender. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Say those 4 words slowly and you'll notice something. There's no request in them, no please give me, no I need. Just a handing over, your kingdom, not mine. Your will, not mine. That's harder than it sounds. Think about the last time you prayed for something you wanted badly. Maybe you weren't praying, your will be done. Maybe If you're honest, you were praying, "My will, please," and quickly. We all do this. We bring God a plan already finished, already signed, and just ask Him to stamp it. But Jesus is teaching something almost backwards. Before you ask God for anything specific, hand Him the steering wheel first. Then ask. There's a woman in the Old Testament who understood this better than most of us ever will. Her name was Hannah, and for years she wanted one thing more than anything else in the world: a child. She was married to a man who loved her, but in a culture where a woman's worth was measured by what she could give her husband, year after year of empty arms had worn her down to nothing. Scripture says she went to the temple at Shiloh and wept so hard, prayed so silently, that the priest watching her thought she was drunk. Her lips were moving and no sound was coming out, just grief poured out without a single witness except God. And here's what she prayed: "Not give me a son, and I'll raise him for myself." She prayed, "Lord, if you give me a son, I will give him back to you." She surrendered the outcome before she even had it. That's your will be done. Not gritted teeth, not resignation, but a woman handing her deepest desire back to the one who gave it to her in the first place. You can imagine how hard that prayer was to finish. Hold that thought, because Jesus prayed something almost identical, centuries later, under circumstances far worse than Hannah's. In a garden called Gethsemane, the same garden where he used the word Abba, Jesus knew exactly what the next 24 hours would hold. Betrayal, a trial built on lies, a whip, nails. The weight of every sin that had ever been committed pressed onto one set of shoulders. And what does he pray? "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Picture a parent standing in an airport, watching their grown child walk through security toward a flight that will take them somewhere far away, somewhere the parent can't follow, somewhere genuinely dangerous. The parent has raised this child their whole life, taught them, protected them, and now all they can do is stand at the window and watch the plane lift off the ground, trusting someone else to land it safely. That ache, the ache of loving someone and no longer being the one in control of what happens to them, that's the smallest shadow of what your will be done costs. Multiply that ache by infinity, and you're somewhere close to what was happening in that garden. If Jesus, who had every right to ask God to rewrite the plan, still ended his prayer with surrender, what does that say about the prayers we throw at heaven, demanding our own outcomes, refusing to add that one sentence at the end? Now Jesus moves to something smaller, something almost shockingly ordinary, right after talking about God's eternal kingdom. "Give us this day our daily bread." Not give us enough bread to last the year. Not give us a guarantee we'll never go hungry again, daily bread. The Greek word behind daily here is epiousios, and here's something almost nobody tells you. This word is so rare in ancient writing that scholars still aren't entirely certain of its precise meaning. It might mean bread for today. It might mean bread for the coming day. Either way, the uncertainty itself says something. This prayer wasn't built on a guarantee you could bank on years in advance. It was built on trust you had to renew every single morning. Centuries before Jesus said this prayer out loud, an entire nation lived it without knowing the words. After God freed the Israelites from Egypt, he fed them in the wilderness with bread that fell from the sky like frost. Manna, they called it, because nobody had ever seen anything like it before and didn't know what else to call it. And there was one rule attached to it: you could only gather enough for that day. If you tried to hoard extra, hide some away for tomorrow just in case, it spoiled, rotted, became worthless overnight. God wasn't being stingy. He was teaching an entire generation to come back to him daily, instead of trusting a stockpile. But it gets stranger. There's a prophet named Elijah who lived out the same lesson generations later, in the opposite direction. Not abundance, but desperation. He was running for his life from a queen who wanted him dead, exhausted, alone in the wilderness, and at one point he simply lay down under a bush and asked God to let him die. And what did God do? He didn't lecture him. He sent an angel who woke him gently and said simply, "Get up and eat," twice, then gave him exactly enough strength for the next leg of the journey, not the whole journey. Just the next leg, that's daily bread. Not a stockpile for the next decade. Strength for today, given by a Father who already knows what tomorrow needs and asks you to trust him with it one sunrise at a time. Now Jesus teaches the line that costs the most. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Read that again slowly. It's not forgive us, period. It's forgive us the same way we forgive everyone who owes us something. Jesus tied those two things together with a single sentence, and there's no way to untie them. You cannot ask God to release what you owe him while you're still gripping a fist around what someone else owes you. Here's the part nobody tells you in Sunday school. This is the only line in the entire prayer Jesus stops to explain afterward, almost like he knew his disciples would try to skip past it. He says plainly, "If you forgive others, your Father will forgive you. If you don't, he won't." That's not a suggestion. That's the most uncomfortable sentence in the whole prayer. And it's sitting right in the middle of words children memorize before they understand what they mean. If you want to see what that line looks like lived out, at the highest possible stakes, you have to go back to a man named Joseph. Joseph's own brothers hated him so much that they sold him their own blood to slave traders for a handful of silver, then lied to their father and let him believe his favorite son was dead. Joseph spent years afterward in Egypt as a slave, then in prison on a false accusation, with absolutely no reason to expect anything from his family except more betrayal, if he ever saw them again. This is not a small offense to forgive. This is a brother's hatred, a father's grief weaponized, years of a young man's life stolen, and then famine hits the whole region. And Joseph's brothers, the same ones who sold him, show up in Egypt years later, starving, standing in front of the brother they ruined, not even recognizing who he's become. Joseph could have had them executed with a single word. Nobody would have questioned it. Instead, Scripture tells us he wept so hard he had to leave the room, and when he came back, he said something almost impossible to say. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." And then he forgave them, not pretending the wound never happened, not saying it didn't matter, forgiving it anyway, fully the way he wanted to be forgiven by the God he had trusted through every single year of that suffering. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about a clever turn of phrase. This is not a story about an Old Testament hero having a nice moment. This is a preview written centuries early of exactly what Jesus would later ask every person who prays, "Forgive us our debts," to actually do. Now Jesus moves toward the final lines. "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." This part troubles people, and understandably so. Why would we need to ask God not to lead us somewhere? He'd never lead us in the first place. Scripture is clear elsewhere that God doesn't tempt anyone toward evil. But that's not really what's being asked here. Jesus is teaching his disciples to pray for protection before the test even arrives. Not panic in the middle of the fire, but armor before they ever walk into the room where the fire is burning. And deliverance, Jesus isn't asking for a clever escape plan or a list of better choices. He's asking for rescue, the kind that happens when a person has run out of their own strength completely and has nothing left except a name to call. Stay with this, because here's where the open loop from the very beginning of this video finally closes. Remember what I told you at the start. The only prayer Jesus ever taught word for word. He never said the same way twice. Matthew records one version. Luke records a slightly different one. Different wording, same structure, same heart. And here's why that matters more than you'd expect. Within a single generation after Jesus gave this prayer, the earliest Christians outside the four Gospels were already writing it down for their own communities. A text called the Didache, Instructions for New Believers, written within decades of Jesus' death, tells Christians to pray this exact prayer 3 times a day. Not once a week at church. 3 times, every day. And notice who it points back to without saying his name out loud. That's the same daily rhythm Daniel kept centuries earlier in Babylon, kneeling toward Jerusalem 3 times a day, even under threat of execution. If even the apostles who walked beside Jesus didn't preserve his exact wording, if Matthew and Luke wrote down 2 versions that aren't word for word identical, that tells you something enormous. Jesus was never handing his disciples a spell to memorize with perfect syllables, the way you'd cast something in an old story. He was handing them a structure, a shape for every prayer that would ever come after it. The words could shift slightly from Matthew to Luke, from Hebrew to Aramaic to Greek to English, from a hillside in Galilee to a phone screen in your living room tonight. And the prayer still works, because it was never about the exact words in the first place. It was about the shape underneath them. And the early church closes that prayer with one final line, borrowed almost word for word from a prayer King David prayed 1,000 years earlier. Yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Not a request, a declaration. The prayer doesn't end by asking God for something else. It ends by reminding the person praying who's actually in charge. So here's what this all comes down to. First, the Lord's Prayer was never a script. It was a structure, one Jesus himself never recited the exact same way twice, because the words were always meant to flex while the shape stayed the same. Relationship, surrender, dependence, mercy, protection, and praise. Second, that structure isn't just something to admire from a distance. It's something you're meant to live inside of. Hannah lived, "Your will be done," before she ever heard those words. Joseph lived, "Forgive us our debts," before Jesus ever taught the line. Daniel lived, "Hallowed be your name," on his knees in a country that worshipped someone else. The prayer didn't invent these truths. It just finally gave them words. And third, this is the one that should stay with you longest. Every time you say "Our Father," you are saying out loud that you are not an orphan in this universe. Not abandoned, not forgotten, not managing alone. Whatever your father was or wasn't, whatever this week has cost you, whatever you're carrying into tonight, there is a Father in heaven who has heard every version of this prayer ever whispered, in every language, by every desperate and grateful and exhausted person who ever called out to him. And he is still listening to yours. So here's a question for you. Out of everything we walked through today, Our Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, daily bread, forgiveness, deliverance, which line hit you hardest? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this helped you see a prayer you've said 1,000 times in a way you've never seen it before, that's exactly why we make these videos. Subscribe. Share this with someone who recites this prayer on autopilot, and the next time those words leave your mouth, don't just say them, mean them.